Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Gabby, and I'm on the steering committee of the Democratic Socialists of America National Labor Body, the DSLC. I've been a rank-and-file carpenter in the United Brotherhood of Carpenters for 9 years and based out of New York City. Which is why I am so thrilled tonight to be having this conversation with Jolene, Bianca, and Kari about how to build and sustain rank and file organizing in the workplace and in our unions over the long haul. This conversation tonight is being presented by EWOC. EWOC is the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, and it arose in response to worker organizing in the face of COVID-19. To build the resources, networks, and provide the training workers need to win their demands. It's a partnership between the Democratic Socialists of America and United Electrical, UE. Now I'm going to pass it over to our speakers to introduce themselves. And they're briefly going to answer the question, what does rank and file unionism mean to you? So I'm going to pass it over to Jolene first, if you'd like to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura and DSA and EWOC. It's good to be here. My name is Jolene Levid, she, her, hers. I've been a union organizer for the last 17 years. I was also a school social worker here in LAUSD for a short time. For 11 years, I organized in healthcare, 2 campaigns in the Philippines, and then for the last 6 years, I've been at United Teachers Los Angeles. Currently a regional organizer for 4 of the 8 areas in UTLA, which is about a total of 913 work sites. And I was a strike coordinator for the 2019 UTLA strike. So rank and file unionism to me means organizationally engaging as many workers in a union shop as possible, again and again, and particularly engaging workers around tough questions and decisions, whether that's the need to raise union dues or asking folks to vote for a strike. Rank and file unionism means identifying organic leaders in any shop and simply providing them with resources so that they can lead all of our union work. It also means growing the union movement, growing beyond where workers are already organized, where you and other workers you're radicalizing have a responsibility in leading that. And then lastly, I'd like to say rank and file unionism is systematic, it's scientific, it means democracy, it means moving union programs left, and it means building power. And so thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much, Jolene. We're going to go to Bianca now.
Hey everyone, what's up? My name is Bianca Cunningham. I'm based out of Brooklyn, New York. I'm from the NYC DSA, but my labor affiliations were first with what I came out of CWA as a rank and file activist, started a union from the beginning and had to go through all kinds of crazy stuff to get a contract. And then I went on to work as a staff organizer for Labor Notes, where I did a lot of training primarily on how to organize democratically, but also talking a lot about race analysis and gender analysis in the labor movement, but particularly anti-Blackness. And now I'm with Bargaining for the Common Good under Action Center on Race in the Economy, where I'm working with unions who want to do bargaining for the common good. And I'm really happy to be here. To me, rank and file unionism means all the things that Jolene said. I don't want to repeat that, but also I think, one thing, and she could definitely speak to this, is it's about building out infrastructure to carry messages, right? This is about transparency. It's about getting away from the handshakes and the secret rooms and the special friends and the wanting to be on the right side of power. It's about recognizing that access is not power all the time. And so this is about holding people accountable. It's about us thinking of ourselves as accountable to the mission, accountable to one another, responsible for the movement of the union, responsible for the work of the union, and that, we're really autonomous and we're really making sure that things are democratic, transparent, easy for people to join, easy messages that people can pick up, messages that resonate with folks. All those things are rank and file unionism to me. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Bianca. I'm going to pass it to Kari now.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, EWOC, for the invitation. My name is Kari Thompson. I am the Director of Education and Director of International Strategies for UE, the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently based in Ashland, Wisconsin on Ojibwe lands up here by Lake Superior. I got my start in the labor movement at UE Local 896 in Iowa, the campaign to organize graduate students at the University of Iowa, and was a rank and file member there for 7 years and held many officer positions. And when I was done there with graduate school, I chose to join the labor movement as staff instead of pursuing academia, and was lucky enough to have a position open with UE. And I was first on staff as a field organizer, and then came into my current position with our national office. And rank and file unionism to me is part of what we talk about in UE as them and us unionism. And I'll drop the link to our booklet that we put out about that in the chat in a second. But the idea is, in addition to everything Bianca and Jolene have highlighted, that putting members in motion is the whole reason to have a union, right? A union is about the power of workers together, and we can only orchestrate that power when we motivate people to be involved. So it's about the person doing the work, but it is also about leadership, right? And that's that rank part of the rank and file, that leadership has to be responsive to the workers who are doing the work, but they also have to provide opportunities for workers to grow and develop in that infrastructure sense that Bianca was just talking about, right? And so that we can move them into aggressive struggle against the boss, because that's how we win more. So I'll leave it there for now.
Great, thank you so much. That's already a really complete picture, or quite a picture of rank and file unionism. So we're going to kind of start with some specific questions we have for the panelists, and later on in the program we're going to open it up to audience questions. And when that point happens, I'm going to ask people to put their questions in the Q&A box, not the chat, just because it's a lot easier to keep track of them and see them there. But we're going to start with Jolene. I'm hoping that you can tell us a little bit more about the UTLA strike. Everybody that I know is watching it extremely closely, very excited about it. I'd love to hear how it was influenced by rank and file unionism. And in UTLA's case, why was teacher involvement, leadership of reform slates, and militancy so important? So I'll go ahead and leave you with all of that.
Okay, so where do I begin? Okay, so folks should know that the UTLA 2019 strike was a culmination of 5 years of consistent supermajority engagement of 34,000 members, UTLA educators across 913 work sites. That's the breadth of UTLA's membership. Beginning in 2014, a new UTLA set of leaders were elected by the members. They began leading with identifying and tackling member priorities, and they knew the members hadn't had a raise in several years, and also had experienced 5 years of layoffs. So this is where the union leadership, the new leadership, started. They hired and created a new set of organizing teams, myself included, They created a research department. They created a parent and community organizing team, and they frankly revamped the communications department. So walking in to UTLA's leadership, you know, this was the era where of the greedy teacher, right? Of like the lazy, greedy teacher. This is when the privatizers were just decimating us. And from the time they walked in, over a dozen union-wide structure tests, which means like campaigns intended to engage the entirety of the 34,000 membership base. This included like their first rally in decades, frankly, and 8,000 of the 34,000 showed up. So that was like the first major structure test. And that happened at the beginning of 2014. And then there was a union-wide vote to increase membership dues, right? There was no shying away from anything that could be seen as conflict. They knew what would sustain our union, and they did it. And we engaged in over a dozen structure tests, leading all the way to a strike vote with a 98% yes. And I also, you know, I want to share some photos with you all as I finish up. Here we go. Some photos. Here we go. So by the time of the 2019 strike, there was an elected chapter chair, which is a steward, in all 913 school sites. This is the culmination of 5 years of like systematic organizing, identifying organic leaders at every single school site who may or may not have been laid off previously, who may or may not have hated their union, just to be frank, right? And you'll see on the right side of the screen, that was the last mass union meeting before we went out 2 weeks later. And every single person in that photo represents one school site in Los Angeles. And there were 2 sessions of that. This is only session 1, okay? So this is just, I just wanna make sure that you could see the arc and like the work that rank-and-file unionism produced. On the bottom left-hand side, you'll see that's just literally a picture of my whiteboard in the office, leading up to the last 6 months before the strike. So you see the systematized actions, right? And every single action was like, our goal was a super majority engagement of the 34,000 members, leading all the way up to the January strike. How do I click slide? Okay. By the time, okay, excuse me. So 100% of our membership went out for 6 days. Mass rallies were 50,000 people in the streets day 1, which is what you see on the right side of the screen. All the way, and I'll show you later on, to 70,000 as a conservative estimate by the last mass rally of the strike. I put in on the left side a sample sign-in. So something that I think people assume is that once we're out the door, it's just this like mass uprising and people just go out because, yeah, we're gonna win, picket line strikes, right? The news, we're on the news, we're in the newspaper. But actually every single day of the strike, every single one of those 913 chapter chairs checked in every morning and gave us a head count. So we knew in real time how many people were on the picket line. We knew if there were any scabs at all, we heard about it, like first thing, 7 a.m., right? And this was the work of the rank-and-file union membership. Nothing was, there were like no shortcuts all the way through the strike. This is on the right side, the last mass rally of UTLA's 2019 strike. 70,000, which is like the conservative city of LA. We say over 80,000, but that's just an aerial shot. I wanted to add in also some of the other like localized organizing that took place during the strike. The bottom left are music teachers from across LA who created a band on the first day of the strike. And this is them on day 5 now, performing on stage. They didn't know each other at all before the strike. And I think that that's the majority of what I wanted to share in terms of images. Like, our UTLA leadership was consistent. They pushed left in every aspect, including after the strike, where they broke away from most unions and endorsed Bernie. From the beginning, we also took a leadership vote to defund the school police, which we defunded $25 million from the LAUSD school police. They shouldn't exist anyway. Last year, and then 2 months ago, with the leadership of community organizations, we're able to move that $25 million into schools in Los Angeles that have the highest number of Black students. So take from the cops, put it right back into the schools. That was all part of this rank and file union leadership model. Our leadership has transformed United Teachers Los Angeles truly, from structure to leadership development, to becoming and sustaining a fighting union. And that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Jolene. We're going to move over to Bianca now. So Bianca, we heard a little bit about how you've been involved in rank and file unionism from kind of a variety of positions, both as a rank and file member and then working for Labor Notes. And in that, can you tell us a little bit more about what you've learned across those different experiences and roles? How did a member-driven democratic approach play a part in your organizing efforts, both as a rank and file member and in a lot of the other work that you've done? So.
Thank you for that question, Laura. Yeah, so like Laura said, I've been involved in rank and file unionism from a number of angles and different roles. I always say, no matter how far I am away from that Verizon retail job, my heart is still there. So I've learned a lot because it's not often that people come in from the rank and file and continue to work in labor. And so some of the things that I've learned have been, that like, oftentimes we always think that like there's something special or like some special skills about like union staff and leadership, that they know something that we don't, or like that they have some like secret sauce that they can give us to win. But the truth is that you can only win if you have strong rank and file and an engaged rank and file. You can have the most skilled organizers on staff at a union. You could have all the money and the resources, you know, at your disposal. But if people are not bought in and engaging like around issues and collectively struggling, you're not going to win. I think that's something that we learned coming to CWA, you know, thinking back on that campaign. One thing that really struck me is that, you know, it was the third attempt at trying to unionize Verizon Wireless in the United States. I think the first was in California. It failed. The second one was in Chicago. It failed. And we didn't even know about those, but then we tried and it was successful. What's the difference, right? I think our unit was the difference. The fact that we were ready, the fact that it wasn't an individual decision to do this, to get involved in this way, but this is something that from the very beginning, before I even reached out to the union, I was building some remnants of an infrastructure to say, bring people in and say, hey, all right, I'm going to make this call. We're going to have this conversation. We're going to need you, right? Things are about to really move fast. And like, you know, having conversations with folks to find out where they're at, I think that there's just like no replacement for that, right? All the digital tools and cool things that we have now can't replace like a good old like one-on-one conversation, can't replace like, you know, the type of listening that you have to do to find issues that resonate with people. And it certainly can't replace collective buy-in. And so that's one of the lessons. I think the second lesson is just to be super flexible. Oftentimes when you're in a democratic space where a lot of people have a different opinions, it can get messy. Don't be afraid of conflict. That means that you're getting somewhere. If ever, like conflict is good. And I've seen so many instances where people have tried to shut down conflict, put them in the back of the room, block them from coming in, say just don't listen to them. But it's like, really, honestly, you have to deal with that. And you have to be willing to be flexible. Something that like I'm just thinking of right now in the midst of our bargaining, one of the things, that they had told us is that we would never go on strike for a first contract. And then after a year and a half of bargaining unsuccessfully with almost no tentative agreements, I think we had one on like a bulletin board, the union decided that we would have to go on strike, right? And so that was like a conversation that we had to go back to the members and everybody and be like, listen, we said that we wouldn't have to strike. Now we have to strike. This is why. This is what we think is on the line. This is what we think we can win, and be honest with people. Then I had to go back and say, okay, well, we're not going on a 3-day strike, y'all. We're going on an indefinite strike. Those are hard things. And when you're especially a member leader, because like who I'm speaking to tonight is member leaders, people who are in the union, who are trying to move stuff in their union, and that you've taken some sort of responsibility for yourself and your union siblings. Like it's heavy to carry that, but we have to be honest with one another. We have to be upfront. So we moved from a 3-day strike to an indefinite strike with a larger group. Then we go out on strike, and it turns out there's a lot of demographic differences between one group that's on strike and the workers in the store, right? They're younger, they tend to skew more people of color. There's a lot of old kind of like labor stuff going on, which is really militant and strong, but also not really inclusive to like the younger folks. And I start to see people not signing in, like Jolene said, you're not signing in to the picket line. So why aren't you coming? Well, then I have to have conversations with people and they say, I'm uncomfortable on this line. I don't feel like I belong. I heard some pretty xenophobic things. I heard some pretty just whatever it is. And so then we made a decision very quickly. And this is about flexibility to be like, let's bring everybody together and we could do like picket line tours, but like, let's make sure our team feels good. Everybody who's on strike, let's rent a bus or like whatever we're going to do. And let's all just like stay together and experience this supporting one another instead of spread out on different picket lines, like how it normally goes. You picket in front of the store that you work in. So those are just some examples of like flexibility, being responsive to people. When there's issues, don't be afraid to say like, we'll just suck it up, or, let's just let's actually find solutions that work for folks. I feel like that was a huge difference. And it also added like an element of like family, that we were like looking out for one another. And you really need that when you're standing up against capitalism, when you're standing up against corporate power, or when you're standing up against all these things. You need each other. The other thing is like the thing that I've learned most is that like, and this is kind of repeating what I said, but like really we think that like people, like there's like some experts like up in some high room that like have the answer to like how we're going to all get free as workers and how we're going to make gains. And we hope that other people are thinking about it. And we hope that legislatively, they pass the PRO Act, and we hope all these things to be true, right? But the truth is like, it's all on us, and we have to decide how much we're going to take. And that means that you have to stand up even when the results may not be in your favor. That means you have to stand up when you think something is right, and when you're sick of it, even when you're putting yourself, on the line. And that's a really hard pill to swallow. And particularly for rank-and-file unionism, it is because, if you're an amazing, awesome union like UTLA, you have leadership, like she mentioned, the Unity Caucus, they came through, they did their thing, and like they were really on board and ready to lead. But then there's a lot of unions, a lot of us that are in unions and have been in unions, that they're not ready to go in that direction. And so what are you doing? That 5 years of dark work, right? That unseen work that you're trying. And it's 5 years because this work is not linear. It doesn't like always happen like the way that we want it to. Sometimes you take 3 steps forward and you're 2 steps back, and that's okay, but you just have to keep at it. And then also like rank-and-file unionism is the only thing that's going to fix the labor movement, because we've seen it done all the other ways. And like, I was having this conversation with somebody today. It's like, labor has to wake up and realize that the world is never going to be the same as it was. We're not going back to the crap that we were doing before, right? The world is different. The political terrain is different. People's minds, I feel like, are awakening. People are demanding more. People are hurting. And people feel more desperate and more ready to like take chances. And so I feel like labor as a collective, we have to get our act together to meet this moment. And so I feel like rank-and-file unionism is like the future of that, and kudos to the unions like UE and others who have been doing that work for a while. But it's the only way we're gonna live, y'all. So we gotta figure it out.
Thank you so much, Bianca. That was great hearing more about the strike that you helped lead, even though I've heard it before, and I feel like every time I hear you talk about it, I learn some new aspect of it or some new angles. So thank you so much. Now, Kari, I wanted to ask you, what can you tell us about UE's commitment to rank and file unionism over the years, especially in the context of the larger labor movement? What kind of has made UE's approach unique? And what are them and us unionism principles? How do they fit with what we've heard tonight from Jolene and Bianca, would you say?
Thanks, Laura. So Bianca was talking about this being the future, but it does have some historical roots. So I'll touch on a little bit of that. So as you can read in that pamphlet, if you want to check it out, the Them and Us Unionism booklet that we put out last summer, UE was founded in 1936 as one of the first CIO unions, Congress of Industrial Organizing Unions. And all of those unions were founded on this idea that we had to organize the whole working class or we were never going to win, right? As opposed to the former model of unionism that was about craft organizing, of just organizing one really specific group of workers, like the machinists in a shop in one union and the welders in another union and the painters in another union, right? And really Jolene's comment about, how the UTLA strike evolved and how their organizing evolved touched on that too, right? It wasn't just about the teachers, it was about also the other support staff that make the schools function. So, this idea of organizing on an industrial basis, on a class basis, is what this idea of rank and file unionism is really rooted in, because what became really clear to those organizers pretty quickly is that part of the problem with the previous organizing model is that it was so top driven, right? There are these old models of how apprenticeships worked, and then people gradually made it up into the union, and it closed people off, and it was discriminatory. It was racist, it was sexist, it was against different kinds of religious groups, all sorts of different ways of excluding workers. But worker power only exists if we are united collectively, right? And the bosses are united collectively, right? They have a plan, they're working together. We knew this, lots of other unions knew this in the early 20th century as good organizers were getting blacklisted and prevented from getting jobs in various places because the bosses were communicating about workers together, right? They're organized. If we are not organized, to Bianca's point, we will never win, right? So that is why we have to get people in motion and engaged in the possibility of what it looks like for them to have power over their work and over their workplaces and with each other and like building the community that they really want to be in, right? So the Them and Us booklet that we put out is not new. These are the principles that we've had from the beginning. Most of them are highlighted in our preamble that's unchanged from 1936. And it starts with this idea of aggressive struggle. And that is putting front and center the idea that as workers, we can never rely on a complacent relationship with the boss. Okay, sure, sometime they nodded and shook your hand and they played nice in front of the camera sometime and you got a little something you were after, but you are never going to win what you need if you just rely on those kinds of things. So that means knowing what risks people are going to take to get what it is that we need, doing those structure tests that Jolene was talking about, right? So that you find out people's level of commitment and you build up their internal strength to do more so that they aren't so afraid, so that they're willing to take on that boss, right? Because that's all we have. We have our labor, we have our solidarity. That's what it comes down to, right? So we have to prepare workers to go into the struggle with the boss, and most people are so afraid to do that. And that's where the second piece of rank and file control comes into play. So we have to involve the workers in figuring out what those issues are that are important, in figuring out what it looks like to govern their own organization so that it prioritizes the things that they think are important. It's also part of worker education, because people don't naturally have the skills to do all of the things that are involved in the union, though I agree with Bianca, they're not magic, but you do need to learn them, right? So it helps when somebody can describe for you what a good organizing conversation looks like to move forward some folks. It helps for somebody to explain to you how to map out who has power in your workplace or in your sector so that you can figure out who your targets are to get what it is that you want to win. It's not rocket science, but there are practical skills that we can develop with each other, right? And that's part of that rank and file control aspect of empowering the workers to be able to do the work themselves with a responsive leadership that has a vision. That's that rank part that I mentioned at the beginning, because you have to know where you're headed, because the bosses have a vision, right? They have a greedy vision. What's ours? Ours is to create a better world for workers. And what does it look like to do that in practical steps, and helping people to map out what it looks like to do that and moving them forward, right? And an organizing conversation is about listening, but it's also about moving people and asking a question to get them to the next step. Another one of our Them and Us principles is political independence. And that is partially rooted in the fact that we can't ignore politics. Politics plays an important role in our lives as workers, but the political system isn't set up for us to have power in it. And so we can't rely on traditional political parties to get what we need. So UE doesn't have a PAC, a political action committee or fund that goes with it. That doesn't mean we don't endorse candidates. We endorse Bernie in both of his recent presidential runs. We have a long relationship with Bernie, with our locals in Vermont. And that's part of why we endorsed him, because we know that he'll join us on the picket line. We know that he understands what it means to live in public housing or to struggle to get medical care, right? And that he's on board with those same kinds of issues that our members think are important for lifting up the working class in general. So this part of political independence is moving people to think about what does it look like to demand what you need from politicians, not just go along with what politicians tell you is possible in any given moment. Another one of our important principles is international solidarity, which I think some people kind of feel like, what? Why is that like up at the top? And for us, that's really about the fact that if you are only organizing workers here, then the bosses will just move their capital somewhere else. And they'll go screw over some other workers while we are left with nothing, because capital moves much more quickly than workers do, right? So we have to be in communication and in action with workers all around the world and listening to what their struggles are, learning from the things that they're working on, and countering the bad influences that happen from our own government and from capital's investments in their countries, so that we can figure out how to win more for all of us. Lifting everyone's standards will be how we are able to win in the long run. And then last, but certainly not least, is thinking about uniting all workers and kind of getting back to the core of where this started, right? Is that we have to, all of the workers have to be united or we can't win against capital. And so that means making sure we have an organization that is open to everyone, regardless of their race, their gender, their political beliefs. You know, we have Republicans who are members of the union, right? And helping them to learn the leadership skills to also take ownership in the union. And it also means thinking about organizing the unorganized, right? That's part of uniting all workers too, that we have to have the broader vision that if we just kind of try to keep treading water, the labor movement will just die, right? Which is part of the great work that EWOC has been doing to bring more workers into the idea of building their skills to win more, and to think about what does a 21st century labor movement really look like. Certainly I agree with Bianca that it has to include involving members in envisioning that out for us. And we have to also keep in mind that the structures that we built for organized labor in the 20th century might not map on to the precarious work conditions that exist currently, but it doesn't mean that the principles, there might not be some things to learn from those, right? And so that's part of why we have been promoting these them and us principles, which is really about making sure we know that which side of the struggle we're on, right? And so the us here is us, the working class, and them is the capitalists, the bosses, who are happy to take everything from us if we don't fight back against them.
Thank you so much, Kari. That was great. And it's really heartening to hear the history and how long this this mode of unionism really extends back, that we're part of a broader tradition. So we're going to move into audience questions. So if you have any questions for the panelists, use the little Q&A box, and I'm going to ask a question, and then the panelists can kind of decide if they want to. You don't have to answer every question, but if you have an answer you feel strongly about, then jump in, or you can direct your question to a specific panelist potentially. So I'm going to start with a question from Richard, who put one in earlier. Can you speak to evaluating structure tests that may not achieve your goals? Like how do you identify the reasons that fewer members might have engaged in something you hoped for, and how do you address those reasons for the next time? So for anybody that wants to jump in, just unmute. Okay, go ahead, Jolene.
I think that's a really important question, and it goes back to what I very briefly call the science of organizing. For every structure test we did, I'll give you an example. We had a dues increase, a vote to increase dues, and it was an all-member vote. This came the year after layoffs finally stopped. So that's the context of it, right? Like people were losing salary, and then a year later we won a raise, and then turned around and said, we actually need to raise the dues significantly in order for our union to survive. This was pre-Janus, right? So we signed up everybody on a new membership card too, that came later. But anyway, so 913 work sites. We didn't have chapter chairs at everyone yet. And what we did was every Monday morning, we got a report of how many people signed a petition in favor of the dues increase. So we started with a petition before the vote, right? It was public, it was face-to-face, it was a hand signature thing. You couldn't do it online. And this method that I'm about to describe is what we did over and over and over again for all 12 structure tests, which is every Monday morning, we got this list, and say I'm in East LA, right? So I'm the leader in East LA. I sit down with union organizers in East LA, and we look at the list and we're like, oh no, there are 30 schools that had no signatures on the petition. And we would go back, schedule visits, or go and stand in the parking lot, or go and sit in the break rooms to identify organic leaders from those sites in order to have the petition carried by actual leaders that worked at the work site. That was the key, right? When I said organic leadership identification, that was key to covering such a massive turf geographically and then numerically. Every time we had a worksite visit by a member leader or by a union organizer staff, or every time a chapter chair held a site visit on the specific structure test we were doing, so like this dues increase, it would be recorded. They would tell their area's leadership or the union organizers in their area, so like East LA, right? It would go into the organizing database and it would impact the reports, which actually came to us twice a week. So twice a week, we would sit down and be like, look, we still got 17 schools in East LA that have no petition signatures. What do we got to do to get this done, right? Because we're not going to go to a vote unless we're sure we're going to win. That's the science of the organizing behind supermajority engagement. So these conversations that Bianca and Kari talked about, that was the heart of all of our structure tests. This organic leader identification, having the tough conversations, saying, I know that you were laid off 3 years in a row. I know that you can barely pay rent, but we gotta pass this union dues increase. Will you vote for it? And that methodical tracking of the data, of the site visits, of the structured organizing conversations is what got us from 8,000 members engaged in the very first structure test to 100% out for the 2019 January strike. And I'm not romanticizing. I'm actually against romanticizing what it takes to have a good structure test and to get better every time. We've had structure tests, like for example, our second "Are you committed to strike?" petition, our second one, only got 75% signatures. But we knew from the first one, where we got over 89%, that we were being lazy in our organizing. We were not getting as many site visits as we needed to. We were not following up with the leaders at every site enough. And so it's being self-critical, finding out the numbers and then doing the work that is frankly pretty hard. None of our structure tests depended on social media. I just want to put that out there too. None of them. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Jolene. That was great to hear more about that and how that went. I'm going to move to another question. This is from RB. How do on-site union organizers effectively combat illegal anti-union tactics utilized by corporate goons? So specifically thinking about what happened in Bessemer, Alabama, and there was a lot of stuff that went on there that was illegal or borderline illegal. How do we combat some of those tactics as an organizer on the ground?
Well, I'll jump in and say first and foremost, yes, they use illegal tactics or borderline illegal tactics, but literally every corporation or employer who's facing unionization has been doing the same playbook since forever, y'all. So like inoculate against this type of behavior, because we don't have control over what they're going to do to a certain extent. They have us. When we're on the clock, we're on the clock. I can talk a little bit about, so our big piece was inoculation, setting expectations in those one-on-one conversations for how the boss is going to react to us taking collective action, and saying it over and I mean, I feel like people were like screening my calls to a certain extent because and they're like, you said all this before, but we already heard it. But it's like, no, we need you to hear it like 17 times and then like 20 more so that by the time it comes, it just doesn't even phase you. They definitely did stuff like that in our unionization efforts for Verizon. They sent the CFO out to like, shake our hands and say, don't you love working here? And you can talk to me and I'm here for you. Or like more like egregious things like taking people down into a basement where there was no cell phone service to kind of like, get them like riled up to say like, if you vote for the union, you may be deported, or, I know you're going through a divorce and it's a custody fight and it'd be a shame if you lost custody because you're so focused on this union stuff that you can't even focus on your own household. I mean, they will throw literally everything at you. Some things that were helpful for us is like having an open like line of communication with one another and some sort of group or thread to where we could say, heads up, this person in higher management just left us. This is what they said. This is what they did. This is who they talked to. They mentioned that they're headed to your site. So be ready for them, right? That kind of stuff helps. But also in the midst of the lies and in the midst of the propaganda, the captive audience meetings, like this is an old one, but we certainly did this. Start asking questions and raising your hand and saying, what do you mean by that? Can we get that in writing? Asking for guarantees or saying, I know that this is a lie and this is why, and you and your coworkers preparing to kind of just shut down the meeting. These people, they pay them a lot of money, but they're not that smart. That's the thing. And they're not oftentimes prepared for the pushback that they face when workers stand up and say, isn't the company paying you to be here? How much are you getting paid? What were your instructions today and your job plan? And those kind of questions really throw them off. So I think it's just like keeping a sense of solidarity, but also doing that work on the front end to prepare for those types of things.
And just one small thing to piggyback off of those excellent ideas, Bianca, is finding ways to have fun with it, especially when you're antagonizing those anti-union folks. So for example, we've had organizing drives where we had people bring in popcorn to those anti-union meetings and like sit there and like, oh, you're going to entertain us for, we're on the clock. We're just going to have a snack or whatever, right? Pass some cookies and, create that sense of camaraderie because they don't know you. You know your coworkers, right? So that can be a piece of it too.
Great, thank you so much. Now a question from Molly. How do you reconcile or handle the potentially conservatizing pressures that are on union staffers versus the workers themselves? I guess kind of have you experienced that, and how do you push back against that?
Well, I can start, but I think that our answer is probably not the same for lots of unions. So in UE, the members are the ones who are at the bargaining table. And yes, we have a staff member who helps them, but our bargaining committees are predominantly members, right? So they're the ones who get to decide what the actions look like. And our staff don't have the ability to prevent a local from going out on strike or taking militant action. And a great example of this is the Republic Windows and Door strike that happened in 2008. And when they occupied that plant, that was an illegal action, right? So like we could not advise them to do that, but the members did it. And then the job of our staff was to support them, right? To support their choice to take that militant action so that they could win, right? To help get them contacts in the media and with politicians and with people who could bring them pizza so that they could sit in there longer and win that struggle. And so, I mean, part of what it means is, getting your education department to do programs that train the members on what those militant options are, right? Because a lot of members don't know what the possibilities are. And you gotta expand the vision of what that aggressive struggle can look like. And so we have places like in the South where, and other places as well, but where striking is illegal for public sector workers. And we still have workers who go out on strike. And you know what? They don't get fired because the bosses need them to come back to these low paid jobs that they can't immediately replace them for, right? So, you have to know where the limits are. And it's partially about the members taking back control from the staff, I guess.
And just remembering your North Star, I'll just add that because as somebody who has been very unwelcome in boardrooms and unions before because people think I'm going to infiltrate or that I'm just trying to start trouble, I don't let that stuff bother me. I'm a rank-and-file union member. My loyalty is with the working class. And I'm not really married to the idea of job security, so that probably helps too.
I guess I could add very quickly. I have been in both fighting unions and non-fighting unions. I'll just say it like that. And the idea that a service model is stable for us is actually not true. It's not. I was miserable. The one union that I was at that it was a service model I was there the shortest, it was 2 years. That's my shortest time ever at a union. And how I not survived, but how I navigated it was to identify, again, the organic leader and train them up. So despite the majority of my colleagues filing grievances all the time, dealing with representational issues, the leaders that I worked with did a lot of that. They were actually better at it than I was by the time I left. And so I would say try that, because stability doesn't necessarily mean like we're going to win anything concrete with that type of program. I promise you'll be happier once you're in a fighting union. That's a personal note, I promise.
Thank you. From Philip, we have, are there any questions or ways of phrasing things that you find yourself coming back to time and time again in one-on-one organizing conversations?
For me, I learned how to do like the mic drop at the end after you make, when you're doing the agitation. My agitational question that I always ask is, are you the type of person that's going to sit back and take XYZ behavior? And I just wait and let them tell me who they are. And I use it pretty often.
I use the same structured organizing conversation model that I believe was made popular, I guess, by 1199. And so semantics are really important to me. I never say thank you, ever, ever, ever. Don't ever say thank you. There are ways of communicating that you are extremely proud to be organizing alongside someone without thanking them and it becoming an interaction that way, right? This is not a service job. And something that I would joke about with other organizers and other leaders was we always have these like phrases that we kind of keep in our back pocket that describe what you see, right? So a lot of times you'll hear me saying like, that was really fantastic work, or that was the perfect way to close your meeting. These numbers are phenomenal, because a lot of times they are, right? When you see a petition from a leader, there are ways, I think, of communicating how well someone executed a campaign without it becoming a thank you. I don't know how else to say that. So that's like the only thing I wanted to add to
that. This question is from William Kirby Washington. Bianca mentioned doing anti-racist work in unions. I'm doing the long haul organizing inside a union that is a holdout for racism and sexism. IATSE, please lend your advice, suggestions, wisdom, ideas on fighting that. And that can be for anybody, but Bianca, if you want to go ahead, yeah.
I feel like this is the work that I've been most steeped in for the last few years. And so I'm like constantly thinking about it, but yet anytime anybody asks me about it, I'm still like, well, I just haven't figured it out. But some things that we've seen that have worked is, I mean, I think like the number one thing that I've learned in doing this work is like this flexibility question again, is like, we have to be like, the type of environment that we're trying to like create is one of growth, is one of self-reflection for both us and our roles in the union, but like also ourselves, for ourselves as individuals. And in order to create that space, you have to demonstrate vulnerability. So people have to be willing to model that. People have to be willing to go there. And that means anything that can come up in the room, you have to be willing to like grapple with that and not just say, we don't have time, or let's parking lot, or let's move on, right? And sometimes that means that you're really having tough conversations in the room that you can't shy away from. And that, like, one of the things that I try to do more so than anything is that like when we're in workshop together, people know that there's no wrong thing to say. We do ask for you to be mindful about the impact of your words, but we also don't want to create a space where people were like, feel paralyzed from having the conversation, because we are trying to get to an understanding, and all of us are in different levels of understanding and in different places. And we're trying to get to a space where we understand so that we can push and work with community and make our unions like fighting institutions for, you know, a whole bunch of people, not just union members. And so, yeah, those are the things that come to mind immediately. I also like really hate like the diversity inclusion type of like anti-racist workshops that I see. I think that it's not right for labor. And I see a lot of people in labor wanting to go in that direction because it seems easy, because it seems like you're gonna have an expert in the room that's gonna teach you all the phrases, but it's just not, y'all. It's just not where we need to be. It's not the way that we need to be building. And so keeping solidarity at the center of everything that we're doing is really, really super important, and having our love for labor like intertwined with this message of like anti-Black racism, or just anti-racism and gender affirming issues. So I just feel like we just need to do better and we just need to stick to like what our gut tells us is like gonna get us to a place that we can fight together, because that's the goal of this, is to fight together.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Bianca. I also just wanted to add one small thing. I think that, I commend you for that long haul fight. I understand that it's going to be a long haul. I also think that it's important that if we are going to claim to be anti-racist, it has to be reflected in the formal program of the union. It's not some committee, it's not some resolution, it's not some donation, right? When we say we want to be anti-racist, that means having member-wide votes on things like defunding the police, going on strike to get ethnic studies into the schools, going on strike to stop, quote, random searches by school police of predominantly Black and then Latino students. So to me, what shows an actual anti-racist program is that it's formalized. Like, I don't want to go to another workshop. I'm sorry. I don't want to go to another convention. I'm sorry. Or I don't want a small minority of membership out in the streets while everyone else stays at home. That's not, to me, an anti-racist union program. And so for folks that are pushing and driving towards that, that's what I would recommend. And that's what I really respect about our UTLA leadership, is that they're not afraid of the Republicans in the membership base being mad that we're saying the formal stance of the union is that we must defund the police because they're racist. And going to those site visits and doing that and getting people to sign on a petition and asking people like, you don't agree? Why don't you agree? Tell me why, right? So that's the only thing I would like to add to what Bianca had already like articulated very well.
And I know we have to wrap up, but those are such excellent points. And to this idea of how do you institutionalize it, this is something that we are grappling with in UE. We do have a largely white upper national leadership, though our general executive board, the rank and file members who make decisions between our conventions is quite diverse. But this is a struggle for us. Those aren't the same things, right? And so in addition to, it's not a workshop for people who want to go there. We've been saying that, if you are in leadership, you have to take this workshop, right? You have to talk about these anti-racist principles that are grounded in being against capitalism, right? Because it's all intertwined for us. And the other thing that we're trying to place right now is how do we set aside some resources, some monetary resources to develop those skills within our members of color so that they feel more empowered to take on some of those leadership and staff positions. So that's kind of that practical piece that maybe you could advocate for within your union, William, like, hey, put the money where your mouth is, right?
Great, and that was really our last question for the night. The conversation just totally got away from me, and we're already at 9 o'clock here. But I did want to ask everybody just if you have any last comments that you want to leave the crowd with here tonight on anything we talked about on the overall theme on rank and file unionism.
I'll go. I just wanted to like send solidarity to everyone on the call. I know that it's been a really, really, really challenging year. We're still here. I also think that, people call us idealists, right? But we have the tools to win the visions that we put forth. And it's the boss's job to tell us that what we're asking for is impossible. And I just wanted to like reiterate what you all know, which is that it's not. We wouldn't be on this panel, we wouldn't be on this webinar. And I don't think that it's idealistic to say like we're actually organizing towards liberation through the labor movement. I think the labor movement has never lost its power. I think that we're at a critical moment where we could win even more for ourselves and for our communities. And so I'm like really happy to be here. Thank you, EWOC and DSA. And very honored to be on the panel with the three phenomenal people. And I'll see you all on the picket line. See you at the next strike.
I just want to send, sorry, Kari. I just want to send solidarity to everyone too. Yeah, it's been a hard year. It's been a hard week. I want to recognize that, Black bodies continue, Black and brown bodies continue to be under attack by the state. I was deeply hurt by the labor movement's lack of response to this last summer. And I'm hoping that unions some of them have gotten their acts together and realized the importance of the urgency of meeting this moment. We can't be on the sidelines anymore. We can't afford to do that, and we shouldn't be. And so I'm hoping that I see something different coming up. There's going to be a bunch of austerity fights. There's going to be a bunch of fights, and we have to be ready to be out and do that work. And also, like, if you're doing this work as an activist by yourself, find you a crew, because this is a lot of work. It's not just about winning the union or winning the contract and then it's done. This is constant every single day, enforcing the contract, continuing to do structure tests, continuing to ID leaders and bring people in so that the rank and file unionism is not about like personalities. It's not about like individuals who who we all look to give us direction. This is about the ability for you to be tapped out on any minute and anybody else to be able to step into this position, right? Into the position that you hold. And so doing that work requires like constant daily struggle. And I just want people to be really have a lot of clarity around what they're entering into. Whenever you say you want to enter into this fight, do unionism in this type of way, make wins, because you got to defend those wins too, because the minute you make those wins, they're coming for you to take that away. And so this is a war, right? And these are battles that we're fighting, but it's long.
Yeah, absolutely, Bianca. Thank you so much for this panel. You guys are such inspirational folks, and I'm happy to be in this movement with you and to know you. And thank you. Maybe Jolene doesn't say that, but thank you to all the people who came tonight to listen. And you asked great questions. I wish we had time to get to more of them, but I'm so pleased that EWOC has created this community of people who are thinking about what it looks like to organize right now. And I'm happy to be able to support that in a little way through UE and using some of the materials. I know EWOC just put out a great organizing guide for folks thinking about what it looks like to do organizing in practice. And I encourage you, I bet Megan can put that in the chat too, if you haven't seen it yet, to check that out. I think it's really well done and really practical and easy to digest. To piggyback on something Bianca was saying about how much work this takes, I do think that's key, right? So one of the challenges of doing rank and file work is that it's constant to maintain those relationships with your coworkers so that you know where they are at and that you can move them and that you can engage them on the questions that really matter. And that's hard, especially when we are in this era of work in which people are having to juggle multiple jobs, right? So it takes away from that time to do the union work. And it's important to recognize those tensions. And I hope that more people will join to lighten that load across everyone's shoulders, right? So when we've got more people involved, that will help us do that. And I think early on in the call, the PRO Act was mentioned. I just want to reinforce that I personally am skeptical of us being able to win this just through political maneuvering. And for those that don't know, this is a piece of legislation about organizing. We've never won organizing rights, organizing laws by asking nicely. We've won them by demanding them in the streets, by demanding them in our workplaces, by inflicting harm in production. And so capitalists have lost money, and then they agree to give us things back, right? So we're going to have to demand those rights to have more protection. They aren't going to just give it to us, because we asked so nicely. And if they did, we should be really skeptical of what those things are going to look like in practice. So I hope people are excited to get in the streets with their coworkers and demand more and demand a better world and open up the possibilities for the working class.
Thank you all so much. This was great. This was a wonderful panel to moderate and to be part of this. And thank you so much to the audience for being here. And that's it for tonight, everybody. That's a wrap. So have a good rest of your night. We'll see you all out on the picket line. Have a good night. See you later.